Welcome to another Liquid Bullet Productions. As promised, we're going on to the questions and answers with TMI, David McKelvey and Albert Patrick. All the questions I've asked from the subscribers and the followers. Question one, guys. This is from John Parker. What do you know about David Harrison from Norfolk? Is he an alleged hitman?
Nothing.
I've done a bit of checking. I saw it on social media a few days ago, I think, and he's now doing time for a contract killing, as I understand it, up in the Midlands. And he had a wife at the time, probably still does, who had a house in Folkestone. That's it. A name, I've checked the document 196, and he's not on there. Apart from that, unless there's some more questions to answer, it hasn't really come to that.
I mean, just very quickly, it came about as a result of something that was put on social media by someone who had put it on there with no grounds, basis, evidence, information or intelligence at all, and it doesn't appear anywhere. There's no material anywhere that suggests it's correct, not even a snippet. So, you know, people have jumped on the bandwagon as usual and gone off at a complete...
Yeah, but if it is connected, then come to us and we'll look at it.
If there is any evidence, I'll put it out there. If there's any evidence at all, let us know. Or if there's any intelligence at all, but it's not. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm not going to discount it because we don't know, but when you've got material that does suggest certain things that you can investigate, then fine. But at the moment, it's just nothing.
Okay, question two from Tim Conkers. He asks, can you confirm static surveillance on Rolfe and how police knew where the Range Rover was at 6:30 a.m?
I think we've covered that in the interviews we've just done earlier. It's that magic word, evidence with intelligence, with gut feeling. Our gut feeling is they were under surveillance, and it came about because, you know, at 6:30 when they went to work, or 6 o'clock, it wasn't where it should have been, outside Rolfe's address, and they've gone looking for it. Other than that, it hasn't been confirmed, but there are snippets of intelligence information that would suggest they were under surveillance. It's admitted they were under surveillance the day before, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, there was a surveillance operation, yes, on particularly on Rolfe,
yeah.
But there was categorically observation posts on Rolfe's home address. And if there's an OP, there will be a surveillance, either conventional or technical surveillance capability as well. There's no point having an OP on someone's address if you haven't got a surveillance team with it. So, you know, you go back to, they weren't able to follow them conventionally, so you would go technically, there would likely be a technical surveillance capability. So there would be a tracker on the Range Rover. Whether or not that is the reason...
More than likely.
More than likely. So none of that has ever been disclosed, though. That material, it's Operation Cluster.
Correct.
And
the drug squad was
the drug squad, and you've got to remember as well with this, the drug squad, the people on the drug squad who were engaged in Operation Cluster are the very same people who do the murder straight after, who form the murder squad. So there's a real issue around independence and integrity in that in itself.
Yeah, but the harsh reality, David, in those days, it was staff, you know, it wasn't only murder they were dealing with. Yeah. So it's a staffing issue as well. Yeah. The little girl Leah Betts, so I think we've answered that one.
Okay, question three from Martin Shaw. He asks, if Jasper was the getaway driver, why was Nichols in Retterdon that night?
That's a question I asked myself right from the very beginning. 1848, Mr. Nichols is in Retterdon. 1848, Nichols checks his voicemail and it pings off Retterdon. So he's there somewhere. Why? For me, he's wrapped round the murder and he was tasked to get Steele and Woombs there. So he knows what's happening and his job was to get them there. He's got absolutely nothing to do with it. And I'm probably warm to that one because that's not when they were killed. And so what if he was in Retterdon at 1848? Yeah, and also when you look at it, he haven't made my mind up. Yeah, don't really know the answer to it, but he was there. And the last one was he knew that Woombs was going to collect his broken down Passat from the wheat sheaf, and he just went there. And he didn't get on well with Woombs, but he went there in case there was a phone call and they needed a bit of help with the Passat that was to be taken back to the garage to be fixed up where Wilms lives. So one of those combinations or something completely different.
And in all, you've got to get back to this. It's irrelevant. What he was doing in Rettendon at 6:30, 1848, 1859 is completely irrelevant, because they didn't get killed between 1848 and 1859. That's the reality. We know that. We can prove that they were not murdered as Darren Nichols described. So what he was doing in Rettendon at the time, does it matter? We think they were murdered after midnight.
Okay, next question from Sasha Wall. She asks, are they Freemasons?
Who?
It doesn't actually tell me who.
Well, I'm not a Freemason, and I'm getting too old to be one, so that's answered. I'm not one, and as far as the victims are concerned, I haven't got a clue. As far as Steele and Wilms is concerned, I haven't got a clue, and as far as Nichols is concerned, I haven't got a clue.
I have never been a Freemason, can't stand them. But many of the police officers involved in this investigation were Freemasons, as were many of the people wrapped around it as well. Some of the informants involved in this, who are directly involved in this, were Freemasons, and there is a unhealthy relationship between the police officers and those informants who were Freemasons.
Okay, next question from Andy SP. He asks, has Ricky Snell been interviewed? Does he know more about Nichols that you don't already know?
Well, Ricky Snell, I haven't seen a statement from him. He is mentioned because Nichols mentions him, and I think he's probably well and truly wrapped up in being a runner for Nichols. If you look at the phone evidence, Snell, well, I think the 1848 call was from Snell. In fact, it was, if I remember rightly. So the voicemail, 1844, believe it or not, Snell called Nichols on his mobile, didn't get an answer. So is that why 1848 is rung him back on his voicemail to see what the message was? So it never asked an interview, being a simple question, wouldn't it, to ask Nichols. You got a call from Snell at 1844, and you talked to him at 1848. What was that all about? So yes, he could well and truly be wrapped up. And he lived round the, he lived up in Braintree, in the same locality. And he says, Nichols says he was with Snell that night, up in the pub, the Spread Eagle, I think. Anyway, he may well know more, but we haven't spoken to him. Probably we should do. It's something to consider, but I haven't seen a statement or an interview in any shape or form from him.
Okay, next question is from Craig Thomas. Why won't the criminal justice system look at new evidence?
The system is broken. The system only allows you to present new evidence through a particular channel, and that channel has got to be through the defence. And until recently, that was the case. However, we have managed to get our report and evidence in front of the CCRC, although they haven't got all of it. They have got the report. And they have opened a review. So we have managed to do something that nobody else has done, which is get independent evidence in front of the CCRC. What happens to it, who knows? But as you've seen, there's been miscarriage of justice case after miscarriage of justice case recently. The system is broken. It takes far too long.
David, they don't have enough staff. They don't have proper, I'll use the word experienced staff, to do what I did for 15 years, and that was drill down into an investigation and look at what's under the carpet, and look at, put your detective hat on and look at what's happened here.
There's one person looking at this from the CCRC, one person. That person's not a detective. It seems to be a very nice man, but he's not a detective. He's got no powers. He can only review what he's got in front of him. He can't investigate anything. He hasn't got a warrant card. This needs a proper review by a police officers with all the powers of the police.
And I just hope that the case officer, the new one who we met, actually looks at every single application right from the first appeal. There must be 20 odd points that the defence team, before we got involved 4 years ago, have raised with the CCRC. So I don't have time to talk them through now, but the most important one was Nichols getting paid to make a book and was seen by Tony Thompson in the cell. You know, that to me should have been kicked out of appeal court, but that's the way life is, sadly. So it's got to be a look at all the issues that the defence team and what we have uncovered are put to, are listened to by the case officer and his commissioners, and make the right call.
Yeah, and that's very important what Albert's saying there, because it's at the moment they have discounted certain things historically, but they need to bring all of those
Correct.
things back into this new review and
Yes.
look at the whole of it. So, for instance, the 5 protected witnesses who said that Nichols told him he was going to be coached, that needs to be reviewed. The rights and the 3 people in the car with the road rage incident, they discounted that. Why? They've never given a reason. They refused to give those statements over. So why did they discount that evidence? That's really important, compelling evidence. They discounted that. You know, David Bristow's evidence. He says categorically Jack Williams wasn't in the lane, and Mick Steele was likely to be where he says he was. That's been ignored. You've got a wealth of evidence that's been built up over time that if you put the whole lot together, it's an avalanche, a tsunami of evidence that shows that Michael Steele and Jack Williams are not guilty of this matter. Not picky bits and pieces. You've got to do the whole lot.
Yep.
Okay, next question. I've actually got 2 of the same question here, so it's from Mark Griffiths and Stephen Cozier. Do David and Albert believe Gilbert Winter was involved in the murders?
No. I arrested Gilbert Winter for murder and got him locked away for 6 months. Mr. Mansfield, a very good barrister, got him off. Key witness was got at, and he walked. There's no one describing a black man, from what I have seen, in the Fortune War that night. And he has been reported missing and believed dead for a long time, but was alive in 1996, 95. So for me, there's nothing that is saying on intelligence or any document that fingers Gilbert Winter that I have seen.
No, same. Likewise, there is no evidence, intelligence, information anywhere that says Gilbert Winter was involved in any way, shape, or form. Again, it came from someone on social media saying something that they heard, 10 times over from different people. It's rumour, innuendo, and again, if I go back to 95, 96, I was involved in looking at the Adamses. We had probes in various places, all their phones, everything. They were under such intense surveillance at that time. If there was any material that existed that put them in the frame for the Rettenham murders, we'd been looking at it. We'd been all over it, and we weren't. And the reality is there was nothing coming out of any of the intelligence sources that put either the Adamses or Gilbert Winter particularly involved in this. And there is obviously that particular probe discussion at Solina Holmes premises between an ex-police officer and Terry Adams that was looked at as part of the CCR, the last CCRC application. We from day one said that was a complete nonsense. It was going to go nowhere. It didn't go anywhere. It was just a conversation that took place.
But put it this way, Gilbert Winter mixed in the right circles, but if there had been a witness at the Fortune War, which is my understanding of where it's coming from, it said there was a black man in the Fortune War at 8 o'clock that night, then I would be pricking my ears up and thinking, well, let's have a look. It's going nowhere, because I honestly believe that Gilbert Winter is dead. Yeah, and for reasons we won't need to talk about here. Next question, sir.
Next one's from David McIntyre. What would have been Mick and Jack's motive in the court of law?
Motive for?
I'm presuming the murders, I'm guessing. I don't know.
The motive that's put forward by Essex Police and Darren Nichols is obviously in relation to the fact that Tate had threatened Mick Steele, and it was all to do with the bad cannabis deal. The reality is we have evidence, because we've spoken to the officers involved, that the the bad cannabis deal was in fact, well, number one, it was after the murders, and number two, the one that Nichols talks about, the officers who took him from court recorded what Nichols said at the time, and Nichols said at the time in relation to that particular one that was his deal. That was his deal. That was his cannabis, not mixed deals. His. The stuff that was thrown into the ARC pits was Darren Nichols' parcel, not mixed deals parcel. So that's nonsense.
Yeah, just a bit of clarity on that one. The bad cannabis deal is wrapped around November '95, when they went across after they brought the drug over.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, then they went back, and Steele went back, and Williams went back, and Tate, and a few Gills, and not Doorman, is it Barry Doorman? Yeah, they all went back to bring the money back because they got it back. But when you and that was the bad cannabis deal that the Crown were using, because on the 8th you got Steele and Williams who got stopped by customs on the coastline up in Clacton, and that tied in with what the Crown's case was. But although there was no cannabis found on the inflatable, so that was the reason. And then you've then got Nichols talking to his informant DCA, yeah, about drugs being dumped in the Arc Pit, and they were recovered in February '96. So when you look at it, he's getting paid out for cannabis that he's put in there that he knows all about. And the harsh reality is that if we believe Steele, and I think we're right about Steele, it is Darren Nichols and other people's parcels who brought them into the country, yeah, and not the other way around. Steele was just a courier, not the owner, not the man who moved it on, because caught with the cannabis afterwards wasn't Steele, it was Nichols. So he was moving it as part of the importation that was kept in the safe house at Michael Steele's mother's garage, house garage. So that's the timing of the bad cannabis. So the motive, yeah, and they got the money back. Yeah. So why are you blowing somebody away? Yeah, for cannabis that's been recovered and got the money back. They say that Tate kept some of it, and that was part of aggravation, but that wasn't big enough aggravation. And still, Tate had only just come out of prison. He'd only been out a couple of weeks. Nah.
Okay, next question is from Steve Bund. What would happen to Nichols if he was proved in a court of law that he lied?
And that would be a tough call. You need people wrapped around Nichols to actually go and give evidence. There'll have to be an agreement that there was sufficient evidence. You need the CPS to agree that there was a charge or there was evidence to prove that. That's why it needs a focused reinvestigation, because hopefully, yeah, in that reinvestigation, the new cops who come on board will be looking at that as a line of inquiry. It is part of their written terms of reference to look at. Yeah, because if you've got evidence that Nichols has lies from independent people, then he's put two people away for nearly half their life, and he deserved to be locked away. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's 2 points. Number one, Darren Nichols, if it could be proven he told lies, he'll go to prison for the rest of his life.
Yep.
You would obviously have the opportunity to cut a deal and finally actually be a supergrass and give the truth and tell us about who actually fitted up Steele and Williams. Yep. And that comes down to police officers.
So Nichols was involved?
No, I'm talking about in the coaching.
Oh yeah, that's another story.
And the setting up and the manipulation, manufacturing of evidence.
Are you going to trust him, David? Nah.
No, yeah, you couldn't
trust
him. But you know, the reality is this wasn't just Darren Nichols involved in this. This was Darren Nichols and others, including police officers, who, you know, the end result was two men got locked up for the rest of their lives.
Okay, next question from Joe Rendon. Did the doorman who had his family in a hotel in Redden that night story ever get checked out to be true?
No.
Good question. Simple answer is no. Has it? I haven't seen a statement to that effect.
No.
Listen, he was a suspect. For me, he was a person of interest. And my recommendation that I've made independently of David's review is this person needs to be dealt with as he should have been dealt with in 1995. you're coming with me. Statement, interview. Simple as that.
He's got 5 books coming out. Probably the true
truth will be
story
there.
of what went on at Retton.
Let's not get carried away with him. For me, what I have done from day one is ignore him. If he believes that Still and Williams are guilty, get on with it, right? You with me? The evidence he puts forward is whatever he wants to say. They've done their time. One's out, one's due out hopefully soon. End off for me. Get on with your life, mate. But guess what? Next.
The next one's from Paul Reed. If Steele was in the back of the Range Rover, there was not enough for one piece of hair, fingerprints or evidence. Sorry, let me read that again.
I think I know what he's getting at. There's no evidence. There is no forensic evidence in the back of that Range Rover. If he had been in the back of the Range Rover, yes, there should be.
Yep. And for me, okay, if he was wearing gloves, maybe not fingerprints, but particles of body tissue with me, clothing, etc. But if you've got Tate's shoe impressions, footwear in the carpet, then why isn't Michael Steele's a shoe impression in the carpet right next to him? And we've showed you the original Range Rover. It is tight as hell to get into the back of that car, and he's not going to get into a car, as I've said already, with a guy who's allegedly going to kill him.
Boiler suit,
wellies,
gloves, a lot. None of it's in there.
Okay, next question for Nick Shute. Can we confirm that the surveillances were called off on TTR the day before the shootings?
No, we don't think they were. We think.
No, can we confirm it? That's what we've been told, David, but we can't confirm it. We're not satisfied that is right, are we?
No, I mean, according to Essex Police, the surveillance was stopped several days before.
Right, okay.
And then the actual operation was concluded the day after, if you look at the paperwork.
Right.
But the reality is that, no, you've got to remember as well, if you accept what Brian Rolfe says is correct, Brian says that he actually put a phone call in as an informant to Essex Drug Squad the day before.
He was carrying a gun and
that his brother Craig was carrying a gun.
Yeah.
So why would they call off the surveillance? They wouldn't. It wouldn't happen. You don't set up a surveillance operation and then literally stop it within 2 days. But again, there's documents somewhere that will show when it started, when it stopped, and logs. And if there was a reason to stop that surveillance, then that will be noted.
Okay, next question's from John Daniels. It's common knowledge that Nipper and his friend Malcolm were the connection between Tony Pat and the travellers' checks they robbed that came from the Canning Town firm. Could this have any connection into their deaths, robbing from the Canning Town firm? Yes.
I've said already, it's a multitude of motives. It's a multitude of aggravation that they've caused in the months before they were murdered. So, yes, it could have been connected. Nipper has talked about the checks, hasn't he? I think so has Brian Rolfe. So, it was one of the aggravating factors that got people together in authority and said, right, those three have got to go, and that could well have happened. For me, that's how for me it works.
Yeah, there's a succession of things that went on. You had a safe house.
Yeah, in Southend.
Robbed at gunpoint by
shots fired,
which was some very senior members of Canning Town's organised crime syndicate had their drugs robbed literally weeks before. There's also the link to the murder of Whittaker. You've got to remember that we've been told that Whittaker's relationship with two particular individuals from Canning Town related to a 2-ton importation of cannabis, and quite separately, we as the regional crime squad were looking for that 2 tons of cannabis at the time. So that is corroborated as well, all linked around the death of Whittaker. So everything goes back to Canning Town. And then, of course, you've got the Hainault robbery, which, until we came along, You know, everybody keeps
No one knew about it.
trying to undermine the Hainault robbery, and because of Billy Jasper and Billy Jasper putting it forward as the motive, but no one had ever identified that. The only reason that came out was because I phoned up my former DI, who had an informant into the Billy Blundell in the Blundell organisation, and said, "What do you know about this?" And he went, "Well, I put information up about a robbery in Hainault, blah 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 blah." Rung Albert. Albert said, "I remember that." And then we ended up speaking to all the officers involved. But the Hainault robbery took place, and you've had Colston turn around and after the Sky documentary deny everything. Well, again, go back. He didn't make it up for the Sky documentary. He didn't make it up to have us over because he'd already spoken about it back in 2008 and 2011. He spoke, as an informant to, was it Norfolk Police?
Yeah.
He spoke,
and
Customs and Excise, HMRC Customs Excise Target Team.
There's an intelligence.
There's an actual intelligence report. He seems to have forgotten that he actually sent us a copy of the intelligence report that he submitted to, or had been submitted on his information. Plus, on top of that, stuff that we've never disclosed is he told us. We didn't just have like a short discussion as seen on Sky documentaries. We sat down and spoke to Colston for hours and hours and hours, and he told us. And he told us stuff outside of what was on the Sky documentary that we were then, or there was actually stuff that he didn't want to talk about that we then went and investigated. And the stuff that he didn't want to talk about, we corroborated it as to where that meeting took place. So, Colston changing his story, I don't know.
David,
but the reality is the Hainault robbery appears to be the motive put forward by Billy Jasper and is a sound motive, really, or part of the motive for the murders.
Yeah, if you look at David Colston, I think I'd never met him until the Sky documentary down the road here, as you well know. I was aware of the name Colston because my staff dealt with the Hainault robbery, and people connected with Tucker were convicted. They got off on appeal because of the guys interviewing at the time did it, and it was a breach of the new PACE Act, so they lost on that. But what is crucial here is that Colston was arrested the night before in a stolen Jaguar motor car that was going to be used as a getaway car. They didn't want to lose the money from the robbery that was to take place in the morning, and one of the robbers used his own van, personalised red Ford Escort van, ABC 123. And we found a witness in the forest that wrote down ABC 123 because it was a date, it was connected to her husband's birthday. What's that effect? So he was locked away in Essex, in the police station, yeah. And the robbers went ahead and they got the money and it was shared out. Our information is that part of it went to Tucker to look after, yeah, and it was because he didn't pay them back when they got off on appeal a year, 2 years later. Bear in mind, our staff went out to Spain to watch two of them out there because they're out there with a lady who was well known in the media social circles. And we were able to show that the people named in the robbery and convicted of the robbery were connected to Tucker. Tucker was interviewed but not arrested. Right, so Mr. Colston knows what happened. I think he's pointing a finger at me because of I had bad luck in relation to being accused of corruption by DC, and he's putting one and one together and getting 11 when it should have been 2. So absolute load of nonsense, but they're very clever at picking up on what other people say, yeah. And here's me, 30 years service, yeah, done a lot of good work and put a lot of bad people away. And who manipulated Colston? I don't think it was Mr. Colston. Enough said.
Okay, next one from Jason Mementos. He asked, Calton Leech has done new podcasts stating he was on 3 attempted murder charges at the time of the shootings, which is why he didn't go with them down the lane at the time. Is there any truth in this?
You've spoken to Mr. Calton Leech. I find him quite a nice guy with me. He's part of the intercity firm, and you know, I was a West Ham supporter as a cop, as a young PC in the East End of London. I lived in the section house opposite the Bowl Inn, so I've got some loyalty to West Ham, and I knew quite a few of the players and all that. So Calton, you'll know him better than I do. What is he? Does he know? Did he know what was going to happen that night, and does he know who's responsible? Is be the question for me. And was he wrapped around 3 murder charges? Don't think he was he?
There were obviously murders around that time that were, you know, he would have been
potential suspect.
Not a potential suspect, but someone of interest who they would have, you know, they would have spoken to at some stage. But it's irrelevant to all of this, because he was obviously in that world.
Yeah.
And you know, Doorman, there was lots of murders, assassinations at that time. It's very difficult.
We don't know, David, do we?
It's very, very, very difficult to answer that question.
Carlton's the one that asked.
Does he know? Does he know what happened? I would say the answer to that is he would likely know. You've got to remember, if you just go back to Cass Pennant's book, if you look at the, you know, the list that Cass Pennant puts in there as thanking, you know, members of the ICF, you've got to remember all these people were all members of the ICF. They're all, you know, they're best mates. They went to football every single Saturday.
Yep.
Every single time West Ham played, they went away. They went, you know, that was their lives. So was Calton part of that? Yes, he was. Was Billy Jasper part of that? Yes, he was. Was Dean Haggerty part of that? Yes, he was. Was Billy Gale part of that? Yes, he was. Was Danny Harrison, the other Danny Harrison, was he part of that? Yes, he was. Were the Bowers part of that? They were all part of it. You know, where the genesis of everything that takes place, as we well know, the genesis of most of the crime that came out of the East End, out of Canning Town in the 80s, the 90s, and subsequently to where we are today, with it all came out of a very small area in Canning Town, and there were operations after operations run by the police that we were involved in separately over many, many years that produced significant evidence, information, intelligence that ties people into organised crime, on a quite a large scale. The truth to what happened to Tucker, Tate and Rolfe lies within Canning Town, and you would expect someone of Calton Leech's notoriety, associations, to know the truth, and probably knew the truth very early.
But if one of the Doorman is right, there was a fallout with Calton and Tony Tucker, so he didn't know.
Yeah, the chap who got interviewed on a podcast, God, I forgot his bloody name. I interviewed him for
I know who it is, but I won't say it.
Okay, but he basically said that there'd been a fallout between Calton and Tucker over a punch bag.
Correct.
That Calton had smashed up with a baseball bat, and that they weren't even talking at that time. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
I think we've answered that as best we can.
Next question is from Kevin Moore. Why do you think Bomb has changed his story so many times? What is his reason behind this?
Ask him. I'm ignoring him. David. You ignore him as well.
I can probably answer this one for you to keep the money coming in.
There may be more to it than that. It may be money. You got to give him his due. He has got a very intrinsic knowledge of this case.
Got all the papers.
Yeah, he has got an intrinsic knowledge of this case, and he has on occasions said stuff on social media that has been absolutely spot on a couple of occasions, or we misinterpreted stuff, and he's got it right. So you can't discount what he says, but he also, if you go back to the early books, his early media, he also knows or knew about Billy Jasper. He knew that whole story about the Hainault robbery. He knew all of that, but none of that, he never put any of that he didn't put any of that forward. He didn't refer to any of it until we came along and we started talking about it. Ask yourself a question: why? Why didn't you want to talk about any of that material? He's not a stupid man by far. Far from it. And you potentially could have upset, and maybe had have upset, some very senior people in what he was doing.
Okay, next question's from Charlie Lawson. Can you elaborate on the 6:30 phone call to Bright and the white Sierra spotted at the top of the lane?
Well, I think we covered it. We've covered it, but the bottom line is David Bright. So let me get this correct. David Bright on the 7th of December was going on holiday and was literally about to leave, and in fact he may have actually left his home address when he says that he received a phone call from an officer from the drug squad at 6:30 a.m. telling him that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were dead. 6:30 a.m, hour and a half before the farmers find the bodies. He puts that into a witness statement, I think in 2002, a formal witness statement, on oath. That's the evidence he gives, that he got told by a drug squad officer they were dead at 6:30 in the morning. He goes off on his holiday, and that's the last that there's any mention of that. The second thing is Mr. Barrington, Detective Superintendent, subsequent Chief Superintendent, likewise gives similar evidence at trial that he knew prior to 7 a.m. that they'd been murdered. So you've got two senior cops in Essex, both of whom say they knew that Tucker Tate and Rolfe had been murdered before 7 a.m. One at 6:30, one says before 7 a.m. How do they know they've been murdered? The only way that could have happened is that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were under surveillance. We know they were under surveillance. We know there'd been a surveillance operation been mounted. And as I've already said, the likelihood is if you've got an OP running, you're going to have a surveillance team running with it, either a conventional surveillance team, i.e. you follow someone directly, or a technical surveillance capability, i.e. you've got a lump on the car that gives you a signal. We think the white Sierra was probably a tracking car, and that they found the they found the Range Rover. They came on duty early before the rest of the surveillance team. They went to find the car. The car wasn't outside Rolfe's house, so they then found it by tracking it down Workhouse Lane. At which point you can imagine the crap had hit the fan. Who do they phone? Governor, Dave Bright. Governor, I've got a problem. We've got the car down the lane. We've got 3 dead men in it. What do we do? You can imagine panic would have set in. So I think there's been a massive cover up around it, but that's the reality of it.
Okay, next question is from Sharon. What is your take on the Linda Millard? Any evidence linking this to the Essex Boys?
Well, I've answered that historically, and I'll just say it briefly again. I'm intrigued about that. Her partner, I would like to know where he was on the 6/7th. He did have a house literally round the corner from where Rogers, the farmer who had the fuselage of shots gone midnight, lived. He is on intelligence. He was into criminality. He's now dead, so we can talk about him. I think his name was...
Can't remember.
Was it? I've got his name. So he was...
Fella, something.
Ball. That's it, Terry Ball. That's it, Ball. So he had a house, I think, also down in Swanage, and there's and Linda Millard is reported missing. Her car was found on a Bristol, on the Bristol River, the River Severn. So she found with her shoes in the back of the car and nothing else. She hasn't been seen since. So she is presumed dead, and I think she is dead. And she gave evidence to her friend to say that she overheard the conversation and the door was shut by Terry Ball. My understanding, if I remember rightly, is that she was down in Dorset when this happened, but could it have been up in the Essex area, i.e. Down there where Rogers lived? So was he actually up there at the time? I haven't had the satisfaction of speaking to an officer in the case. There is a missing person report in, and the reporter has come back to me, but I haven't got any fresh information on it. So it is a line of inquiry that isn't really going to take us any further because both people are dead, in my honest opinion. So now it ain't going to take us anywhere unless unless the officer who took the missing person inquiry can say something or remember something. So there's that. It's one of those which probably may not be connected, but it's not going to take us anywhere evidentially. But interesting, it could well be connected, only because of where they were living at the time. It was in the same locality.